In recent days, information has surfaced in Western political circles that could seriously alter the balance in transatlantic relations. According to sources close to diplomatic structures in Brussels and Ottawa, Europe and Canada are discussing the possibility of restricting and complicating travel for American tourists. Insiders claim that the scenario could even extend to the introduction of a visa regime, a shocking blow to millions of U.S. citizens and a personal failure for Donald Trump's administration. For the first time in decades, U.S. allies are not only considering such measures, but openly discussing them in closed consultations, which in itself signals a sharp cooling of relations. Respected outlets, including Financial Times, Der Spiegel, and Canada's Globe and Mail, report that the visa question is being actively debated as a lever of pressure on Washington. Europe and Canada have grown tired of Trump's tariff policies, which have put their economies at risk during an already deep crisis. Germany, France, Italy, and several other countries are facing industrial slowdown, an energy crisis, and declining trust in Brussels. Instead of supporting allies, the White House has only added to their problems, imposing tariffs on steel, automobiles, and agricultural products. In Canada, the situation is similar. Industries tied to U.S. exports are suffering from Trump's protectionism. According to sources close to the European Commission, consultations remain at an early stage. However, the mere fact that the idea of visas for Americans is being discussed has triggered a stormy reaction in Washington. One White House advisor told Politico that Donald Trump was furious when he learned of it. According to the publication's sources, the president literally exploded, calling it an act of betrayal by allies and declaring that the United States would respond in kind. The problem, however, is that if Europe and Canada do impose visas on Americans, it would be a political disaster for Trump in an election year. Economists warn that the consequences would be felt well beyond tourism. The introduction of a visa regime would hit transatlantic business, educational exchanges, and professional travel. Each year, millions of Americans travel to Europe and Canada for work or study, and any new hurdles would become an additional barrier for business. Moreover, as Bloomberg notes, with the dollar strengthening and the trade war with China already hurting U.S. companies, a new rift in relations with allies could leave the United States even more isolated. The symbolism of the situation is amplified by the fact that the initiative is being discussed now, against the backdrop of growing dissatisfaction with Trump's NATO policy. According to sources in Brussels, many European diplomats believe that the White House is deliberately weakening the alliance for short-term gain. The tariffs were the last straw. If in the past Europe overlooked Trump's crude remarks about allies freeloading on American military spending, the direct blow to their economies has become unacceptable. In Canada, as reported by the Toronto Star, discussions of a visa regime are taking place not only among officials, but also under public pressure. Canadian labor unions and business associations openly declare that it is time to show Washington that Canada is not a vassal. With the agricultural sector and automobile industry suffering losses from U.S. tariffs, the idea of a visa response is seen as a fair step. According to sources close to Trump's circle, he views the situation as a personal insult. For him, any threat of visa barriers is not just a diplomatic signal, but a challenge to his political image as a strong leader. The White House understands that even the mere discussion of visas with allies could be used by Democrats as proof of Trump's foreign policy failure. America respects itself again, he has proclaimed at rallies. But what will his voters say if tomorrow their trips to Paris or Rome require a visa? Analysts note that the situation could still change. Europe and Canada are, for now, merely demonstrating the possibility of a tough response, hoping to pressure Trump into reconsidering his tariff policies. But even the threat of a visa regime is already eroding trust. The very idea of closing the door to Americans in Europe sounds like a small diplomatic revolution. If it becomes reality, it would be the first time in history that U.S. allies deliberately took a step aimed directly at American society, rather than just its economy. If a visa regime is indeed introduced, it would mark a historic moment, the symbolic end of the transatlantic unity era and the beginning of a new age in which even allies are prepared to pressure America as harshly as its geopolitical adversaries. Looking at the practical consequences of a possible visa regime for Americans, makes the picture even more alarming for the Trump administration. Tourism comes first. Every year, millions of U.S. citizens travel to Europe, to Paris, London, Rome, Barcelona. According to the European Travel Commission, in 2024 alone, over 20 million American tourists visited Europe. Canada received another 15 million. These are not just leisure trips. They represent billions of dollars flowing into hotels, restaurants, museums, and transportation companies. If tomorrow every American has to go through a lengthy bureaucratic visa procedure, the number of trips will drop sharply. Tour operators warn that demand could fall by at least 1/3, hitting not only Americans but also the tourism industries of Europe and Canada. Yet Brussels and Ottawa are consciously ready to sacrifice part of this income in order to show Washington that tariff policy will not go unanswered. Business is no less important. For decades, American corporations have built complex supply chains, research centers, offices, and subsidiaries in Europe and Canada. Every day, thousands of specialists, managers, and engineers cross the Atlantic for meetings, conferences, and joint projects. If tomorrow every such trip requires a visa, this will create new costs, delays, and uncertainty. Companies will lose time and money to bureaucracy, inevitably reducing U.S. competitiveness. Moreover, in the context of global competition, American corporations risk ceding ground to Asian companies, which are actively expanding in Europe without facing such restrictions. The possible visa measures would also strike a heavy blow to the educational and scientific sphere. Every year, tens of thousands of students and professors from the United States travel to Europe and Canada for academic programs, exchanges, and research. Universities such as Harvard, Princeton, MIT, and other leading American institutions maintain partnerships with European and Canadian universities. If a visa regime becomes reality, academic mobility programs will be threatened. Students already face difficulties studying in Asia due to political tensions, and now Europe, traditionally friendly and open, may also close its doors to Americans. This would not only damage the image of the U.S. as a knowledge nation, but also pose a real threat to future generations of researchers. The symbolic effect of such measures would be even stronger. For decades, the United States has positioned itself as the center of the free world, a country whose citizens can travel almost without restrictions. The introduction of visas by its allies would shatter this image. As The Guardian notes, millions of ordinary Americans would, for the first time, face the reality that their passports no longer automatically open doors to Europe or Canada. This would be perceived as a humiliation, a signal that even the closest allies are no longer willing to fully trust the U.S. for the White House. It would be a blow to the image of a powerful nation, since visas are not just bureaucracy, they are a symbol of distrust. For Europe and Canada themselves, such a step would also be historic. It would signify a final break from the role of junior partners to Washington and a move toward a more independent course of action. Thus, even if a visa regime remains only a threat for now, the very fact that it is being discussed already demonstrates tectonic shifts in global politics. For the first time in many decades, the U.S. risks facing allies who are becoming independent actors, ready to act against Washington as decisively as they would against its adversaries. And herein lies the main weakness of Trump's policy. Instead of strengthening the U.S.'s position in the world, it is causing even its closest partners to seek ways to pressure America.